Kessie Grant runs through the crowded streets of Gangnam in heels, terrified, clutching her broken phone. Two aggressive debt collectors from a nightclub are chasing her because her coworker framed her for stolen money. She could hear them getting closer every second she wasted standing still. Her heels were a mistake. Trusting her coworker with her access card was the biggest mistake of all. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the luxury hotel lobby 30 feet ahead of her, blazing with light, and the security guard near the glass doors who would absolutely recognize the men chasing her before they could do anything stupid in public. She ran. Straight through the lobby. Past the marble front desk. Past a stunned bellhop holding someone's luggage. She spotted a private elevator to her left, doors already open, and she threw herself inside just as she heard one of the men shouting her name from the entrance. The doors closed. She pressed her back against the elevator wall, breathing so hard her whole chest ached. The elevator moved without her pressing a single button. It was already programmed. It went up. Way up. The doors opened into darkness. Not a hallway. Not a floor. A penthouse suite. Enormous. Silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing all of Gangnam sparkling 40 stories below. She stepped inside because she had no other choice, then pressed herself against the wall beside the bed and told herself to think. A door opened. Steam poured out from a bathroom she hadn't noticed. And then he walked out. Tall. Korean. Black slacks, shirt hanging open at the collar, still being buttoned slowly with the kind of calm that belonged to men who had never once been rushed by anyone. Tattoos traced the left side of his collarbone, dark ink, deliberate lines. His face was sharp. His eyes were sharper. Kim Soo-Hyun stopped the moment he entered the room. He looked directly at her. Not startled. Not confused. Just still. Like a man who had seen many things and had learned long ago not to react to any of them. Kessie could not move. He walked slowly past her toward the suite's main door. She heard the lock click into place. Then he turned, looked at her again, and said in perfect, quiet English, "Stay quiet if you want to live. If you've been glued to the screen already, you're going to want to subscribe and hit the notification bell because this channel is where the most addictive romance stories live." Kessie's mouth went dry. She knew that name. Everyone in Gangnam knew that name, even the foreigners who'd only been in Seoul 3 months like her. Kim Soo-Hyun wasn't a rumor. He controlled underground financial networks across Seoul. High-end casinos. Debt rings. Publicly, he was a wealthy hotel investor. Privately, he was the man nobody crossed and lived to tell the story in detail. And she had hidden beside his bed. I wasn't trying to steal anything, she said quickly, which was perhaps the least useful thing she could have said. I was being chased. I didn't press any buttons. The elevator just... I know, he said. That stopped her. He walked to the bar cart near the window, poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass, and did not pour one for her. He stood looking out at the city like she was mildly inconvenient rather than terrifying, which somehow made everything worse. Then you know I have nothing to do with those men, Kessie said. Her voice was still shaking, but she pushed through it. She was from Atlanta. She had survived things before this. She could survive a cold Korean man in a very expensive penthouse. Probably. I work at the VIP lounge in the East Tower. Another employee used my access card tonight to steal from clients. Those men think I did it. I didn't. Soo-Hyun said nothing. He swirled his whiskey once. Are you even listening to me? She said. You breathe very loudly, he said. Do Americans do that naturally? Her jaw dropped. Excuse me. It's a sincere question. I am trying to explain to you that my life is in danger. I heard every word. I'm simply waiting for you to stop repeating yourself. Kessie stared at him. Then, because the night had been so catastrophically absurd that social filters no longer applied, she said, do Korean Mafia bosses always interrogate women while they're half-dressed? There was a pause. A very brief, very controlled pause. Something moved at the corner of Kim Soo-Hyun's mouth. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she suspected he produced. Sit down, he said quietly. The men outside are connected to a rival financial group. If they find you inside this penthouse, it creates problems I don't need. So you'll stay until morning. And then we'll see if your story checks out. It's not a story, it's what happened. Sit down. She sat. The hours that followed were the strangest of Kessie Grant's 27 years on Earth. She had expected silence. Cold hostility. Maybe a phone call to whoever disposed of problems for men like him. What she had not expected was Kim Soo-Hyun reappearing from the penthouse kitchen at 2 in the morning carrying a small pot of instant ramen, sitting at the dining table without a word, and eating it with the same solemn composure he'd applied to everything else he'd done since she arrived. "You're a billionaire," she said, watching him. "Yes. And you're eating instant ramen at 2 a.m. I like instant ramen. You could order anything. I'm aware of my own options. Thank you." She pressed her lips together to stop herself from laughing, because laughing felt inappropriate, and also she genuinely could not explain why the impulse was there at all. She watched him eat. She watched him glance once toward the mounted television where an old black and white jazz performance was playing on low volume. "You like jazz?" she asked, surprised. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, Coltrane. Sometimes Miles Davis. "I grew up listening to Miles Davis," she said. "My grandfather had every album." He looked at her for the first time in an hour. Really looked at her, at the warm brown skin, the natural hair she'd pinned back for her shift that had mostly come loose during the chase, the eyes that had been running on fear all night, but still held something sharp underneath it. "Where in America?" he asked. "Atlanta." He nodded once, like that meant something to him. Then he looked back at his ramen. It was such a small exchange. But it cracked something open between them, some invisible pressure valve releasing just enough tension to make the rest of the night feel like a conversation rather than a standoff. She learned, in fragments, not from him directly but from the way the room revealed him, that he hated unnecessary noise. That he had lived in this penthouse for 4 years without decorating it personally, because he considered decoration a form of sentimentality, and that the only book on his nightstand was a Korean translation of a French philosophy text that he admitted he had never finished. "Then why keep it there?" she asked. "To remind myself I don't know everything." She hadn't expected that answer. She sat with it for a long moment. "I'm Kessie," she said. "I know your name." "That's not the unsettling part it should be at this point." "You adjust quickly," he said. Not quite a compliment. Not quite not one. "I had to learn to," she said quietly. He didn't ask what that meant. But something in the way he set down his chopsticks told her he had heard the weight in it. His right-hand man, Jiho, arrived at 7 in the morning. He was lean, observant, dressed in a dark suit, and he stopped completely when he saw Kessie sitting at the penthouse dining table with a cup of tea she'd made herself from the kitchen. His eyes moved slowly from her to Soo-Hyun. "You allowed a woman into your penthouse," Jiho said. "She was hiding from debt collectors," Soo-Hyun said, not looking up from his phone. Jiho checked his watch. 8 hours. A pause. "Leave my office," Soo-Hyun said. "This is a dining room." Jiho left. But the look he shot Kessie on his way out was not hostile. It was the look of a man who had waited years to see something happen and was quietly, privately thrilled about it. The accusation against Kessie did not disappear on its own. Over the following days, she learned who had actually set her up. Yoo-ju, a woman who moved elegantly through Soo-Hyun's hotel business circle, beautiful in the calculated way of someone who had spent years refining it as a weapon, and quietly dangerous. She had wanted Kessie removed from the moment she arrived, and she had used the access card theft as her method. What Yoo-ju had not accounted for was that Kessie would end up in the one penthouse in Gangnam that made her untouchable. Soo-Hyun did not announce that he was helping Kessie. He didn't make speeches or gestures. He simply used his influence, quietly, methodically, to expose inconsistencies in the accusations. Security footage that contradicted the timeline. A financial trail that pointed away from Kessie entirely. He dismantled Yoo-ju's carefully constructed lie the way he apparently did everything, efficiently, without raising his voice, and without leaving his own fingerprints on the wreckage. "You didn't have to do that," Kessie told him, one evening in the penthouse. "The accusation was built on bad information," he said. "I don't tolerate bad information in my city." "I'm not your city." He looked at her. "No, you're not." But the way he said it didn't feel like a dismissal. It felt like something he was turning over in his mind, examining from multiple angles, the way he examined everything. She started spending more time near him voluntarily. Not because she needed protection anymore, the accusations had largely crumbled. She stayed because she wanted to. That was the honest truth. She stopped avoiding sometime around the fourth evening, when he took her on a late-night drive through Gangnam without any destination, and they rode in complete comfortable silence, with the city lights streaming past the windows. And it was the most at ease she'd felt since she arrived in Seoul. "Teach me something in Korean," she said once. "What do you want to know?" "Something useful." "Ijin napun 생각이야," he said. "What does that mean?" "This is a bad idea." She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. But she could see it, that almost smile again. She was starting to recognize it. Starting to look for it. They had dinner in a restaurant he apparently owned and therefore had entirely to themselves. He explained Korean drinking customs with the focused seriousness of a man giving a business lecture, and she listened and then immediately violated every single rule he'd just explained just to watch his reaction. "You did that intentionally," he said. "Absolutely," she confirmed. He poured her a second drink without commenting further. But it was a different night that changed everything. A quiet one. The penthouse again. Gangnam glittering outside the windows. She asked him something she'd been holding back for a week. "Have you ever actually been in love?" The silence stretched long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, I don't think people like me are allowed to." She felt that in her chest. The honesty of it. The loneliness of it, stated so flatly, like it was simply a rule of physics rather than a choice. "That's not true," she said softly. He looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, the composure slipped. Just slightly. Just enough for her to see what lived behind it. Then it was back. But she had seen it. And she knew that he knew she had. The internal pressure began when Yuju discovered the accusation had been dismantled and realized who had dismantled it. She was not a woman who accepted defeat without causing damage on her way down. She began leaking information, quiet suggestions to the right people within Soo-Hyun's organization that their leader had become emotionally compromised. That a foreign woman had his attention. That attachment was a liability. His organization had questions. Not spoken loudly, but questions. Kessie heard about it indirectly. She found him standing at the window one evening, phone in hand, jaw set, and she knew something had shifted in the political weather around them. "I heard about what's circulating," she said. "I'm not worth this kind of trouble for you." He turned to face her. "You should step back from me," she continued. "Protect your position. I'm not asking you to choose." "I built this organization," Soo-Hyun said, voice quiet and absolute. "Every piece of it, from nothing. If my own people have concerns about my decisions, they can come to me directly." "Soo-Hyun, I don't abandon things because they become complicated," he said. "I never have." He looked at her steadily. "Don't ask me to start." She didn't say anything. But something locked into place inside her chest, something that recognized, without needing to analyze it, that this man was real. That the walls weren't performance. That the softness underneath them wasn't weakness. That she was looking at someone who would not pretend, who would not bend, and who was choosing not to step back from her in spite of every practical reason to do so. She respected him more in that moment than she had ever expected to respect anyone she'd met inside a stranger's penthouse at midnight. The gala was an elite investors event held in the grand ballroom of the hotel's main tower, all crystal lighting and wealth arranged carefully around itself. Kessie was there because Soo-Hyun had asked her to attend with him. She wore burgundy. She had her hair down. She was nervous in a way she hadn't been since she arrived in Seoul, and she refused to show it. Yuju waited until the room was full. She crossed toward Kessie with a champagne glass and a smile that had been assembled rather than felt, and she said, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear, "It's remarkable, isn't it? How some women travel all this way and still manage to find a man to carry them. I suppose every city has its particular type of foreigner looking for a particular type of rescue." The room heard it. Kessie heard it. She felt the heat move through her, not panic. Anger. The very specific and highly compressed anger of a woman who had worked for everything she had and was being publicly reduced to nothing for the entertainment of people who had never once had to fight for anything. She held herself still. Before she could speak, Kim Soo-Hyun stepped forward from 3 feet away. He had been close enough to hear every word. He looked at Yoo-ju with an expression so composed and so cold it made the temperature of the ballroom feel like it dropped. "You misunderstand something," he said. The room went quiet. Completely quiet. "In this relationship," Soo-Hyun said, "I am the dangerous one." Then he walked calmly, without hurry, directly to Kessie's side. He stood beside her in front of every important person in Seoul's elite business circle and did not look away from anyone who looked at him. It was not romantic, exactly. It was something more than that. It was authority choosing her. Power making a statement. A man who frightened entire rooms deciding publicly that she was worth frightening them for. Yoo-ju said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The people around them had already made their read of the situation and adjusted accordingly, the way people always adjusted around Kim Soo-Hyun. Kessie exhaled slowly. Then she picked up a fresh glass of champagne from a passing tray and handed it to him. "I believe this is where you say you told me so," she said quietly. "I would never," he said, and he took the glass. Weeks later, the city kept moving the way cities do, indifferent to the private lives occurring inside its buildings. Kessie understood his world now. Not glamorized. Not cleaned up. She understood that it was complicated and that certain shadows would never fully lift and that the man beside her would never be simple. She had chosen to be there anyway. Not despite knowing all of that. Because of it. Soo-Hyun, for his part, had quietly reorganized around her. He made time. Actual, deliberate time from a life built on control and schedule and the absence of softness. He answered her calls. He sat beside her in the penthouse, watching the city instead of working through the night. He was still feared by everyone who needed to fear him. But he was different with her. Quieter. Less armored. Jiho had stopped pretending he wasn't keeping mental score of every development. He had begun saying things like, "The situation continues to progress," whenever Kessie's name came up, in the tone of a man who was very pleased with himself for being right. Soo-Hyun had stopped telling him to leave rooms, which was its own kind of confirmation. One night late, Gangnam glowing 40 stories below them, the jazz Kessie had put on filling the penthouse softly. She lay beside him and looked at the ceiling. "So what exactly are we?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "A very bad idea," he said. She laughed real, unguarded, the kind of laugh she hadn't expected to find in Seoul, let alone here. He was quiet again. Then, low enough that it might have been for himself as much as for her. "One I intend to keep." She turned her head to look at him. He was already looking at her. Outside, the city pulsed on. Indifferent. Magnificent. Entirely unaware that inside this particular penthouse, something that had started with terror and a locked door and a whiskey glass had quietly, stubbornly, become something neither of them had planned for and neither of them intended to let go. Sometimes love doesn't arrive gently. Sometimes it walks out of a shower in a penthouse you were never supposed to enter. If this story kept you watching until the very end, do something about it, subscribe, leave a comment telling me what your favorite moment was, and hit the like button. New Afro-Korean romance dramas drop regularly on this channel, and you do not want to miss a single one. Thanks for watching.